My daughter's fiancé never asked about her favorite color or her childhood dreams. He only asked about the soil composition of my ranch and the water rights to the creek. I thought I was just being a paranoid old cowboy. But as we stood at the altar and the priest asked who gives this woman to be married, my daughter did not let go of my arm. Instead, she pressed a crumpled, sweaty note into my palm, hidden behind her bouquet of white roses. I opened it, and the world stopped. It read, "Dad, help me. He knows about 1998. I looked up at the groom's perfect predatory smile, and I realized this was not a wedding. It was a hostage situation, and I was the target. Before I tell you how I turned this cathedral into a crime scene, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Let me know in the comments what time it is where you are watching from. I am Harlan West, 72 years old, and this is the story of how I almost lost everything to save the only thing that matters. The organ music was loud enough to rattle the stained glass windows of the St. Jude Cathedral. It was a pretentious venue for a rancher's daughter, but Braden had insisted. He insisted on everything. The imported lilies, the $500 plates of lobster, the string quartet. Standing there in my stiff tuxedo, I felt like a bull trapped in a china shop. My neck itched from the starch, but the discomfort was nothing compared to the cold dread spreading through my chest. I looked down at Lily, my beautiful girl. She looked like a princess in that lace gown, but she was shaking. Not the nervous tremble of a bride, but the violent shivering of a trapped animal. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were darting around the room as if looking for an exit. I squeezed her hand, trying to offer some comfort, but her fingers were ice cold. We reached the end of the aisle. Braden Cole was waiting there. He looked like he had stepped out of a magazine. Tall blonde, a $3,000 suit that fit him like a second skin. He flashed that charming smile that had fooled everyone in town, including me, for about 5 minutes. But up close I saw what the cameras missed. His eyes were dead. They were flat and cold, like a shark smelling blood in the water. He wasn't looking at Lily with love. He was looking at her like she was a deed to a property he had just acquired. The music faded. The priest, a young man who looked like he had never worked a day in his life, cleared his throat. He began the standard speech about love and commitment. I tuned him out. My thumb was rubbing the piece of paper Lily had slipped into my hand. I could feel the texture of the paper damp from her sweat. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the priest asked. The silence that followed was a fraction of a second too long. This was my cue. This was the part where I was supposed to hand over my only child, the girl I had raised alone since my wife passed to this man. I was supposed to step back and fade into the background, just another old man who had served his purpose. But I didn't let go. I unfolded the note in my hand, keeping it low, so only I could see. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. "Dad, help me. He knows about 1998. The year 1998 hit me like a physical blow to the gut. The air left my lungs. That was a year I had buried deep. A year of rain mud and a terrible mistake on the ranch that I thought I had taken to the grave." How did he know? How could he possibly know? I looked up at Braden. His smile had not wavered, but his eyebrows raised slightly, daring me. He knew I had read it. He was gloating. He thought he had me checkmated. He thought the shame and the fear of prison would make me hand over Lily and eventually the deed to the West Ranch. He thought I was just a senile old cowboy who would do anything to keep his reputation clean. He was wrong. He forgot that before I was a rancher, I was a Marine, and you do not threaten a Marine's family. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and betrayal. I released Lily's hand gently. She looked at me, terror in her eyes, pleading silently. I gave her a small nod. Then I reached behind the small of my back, under the tail of my tuxedo jacket. My fingers found the familiar cold steel of my Colt 1911. It was an antique, the same model I carried in the service. I had removed the firing pin that morning, a safety habit for crowded events, but Braden didn't know that. To him, it was just a cannon pointed straight at his chest. I pulled the weapon. The motion was smooth, practiced. The heavy gun leveled directly at the bridge of Braden's nose. The gasp from the congregation was like a sudden vacuum sucking the air out of the room. Then came the screams. Braden's mother, Veronica, a woman who wore more jewelry than a pawnshop window, shrieked and dropped her champagne glass. The priest dived behind the altar. "The wedding is off!" I growled. My voice sounded deeper, rougher than usual. It echoed off the stone walls. "Get out of my sight, Braden, before I forget that this is a house of God." Panic erupted behind me. Guests were scrambling over pews, knocking over flower arrangements. But in the center of the storm, Braden did not move. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, staring down the barrel of my gun, and his smile actually widened. It was the most chilling thing I had ever seen. "You are making a big mistake," Harlan Braden said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. He stepped closer, pressing his chest right up against the muzzle of the gun. "Do you really think you can shoot your way out of this? You are just proving everything I told the authorities. What are you talking about?" I demanded, my hand steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I'm talking about the fact that you are unstable," Braden whispered low enough so only Lily and I could hear. "I'm talking about the fact that a man with your violent history shouldn't be in charge of a $20 million estate. And now you just gave me the perfect public performance to prove it." He leaned in closer, his cologne cloying and sweet. "You just signed your own death warrant, old man. And you didn't save her. You just guaranteed that I own both of you." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder by the second. Someone had called the police before I even drew the weapon. It was a setup. The whole thing was a trap. He wanted me to snap. He wanted a public display of violence to declare me incompetent. I looked at Lily. She was sobbing now, her hand covering her mouth. I looked back at Braden. I realized then that this wasn't just about a wedding. This was a hostile takeover, and I had walked right into the kill zone. But as the heavy oak doors of the cathedral burst open and blue lights flooded the sanctuary, a cold resolve settled over me. He wanted a war, he was going to get one. I lowered the gun slowly, dropping the magazine to the floor with a loud clatter to show the officers I was disarming. Hands in the air. "Drop the weapon." The police shouted, rushing down the aisle with their service weapons drawn. I raised my hands, staring straight into Braden's eyes. "This isn't over," I said loud enough for the approaching officers to hear. "You might take the ranch, boy, but you will never keep it." Braden just winked. As the officers grabbed my arms and twisted them behind my back, the cold metal of handcuffs biting into my wrists, I didn't struggle. I was already planning my next move, because Braden Cole had made one fatal error. He thought 1998 was my weakness. He didn't realize that surviving that year was what made me dangerous. And now I had nothing left to lose. The metal chair in the interrogation room was bolted to the floor, just like the handcuffs were bolted to the steel table. I sat there rubbing my wrists where the metal bit into my skin, listening to the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. It was a sterile, soulless sound, the complete opposite of the wind whistling through the pines back home. I had been sitting there for an hour, staring at a two-way mirror, seeing nothing but my own reflection. A 72-year-old man in a tuxedo, looking less like a father of the bride and more like a convict in costume. The heavy door buzzed and swung open. Mitch O'Connell walked in. He didn't look happy. Mitch and I had known each other since high school football. He was the quarterback, I was the linebacker. Now he was the best defense attorney in the county, and I was the idiot who had just brandished a firearm in the house of the Lord. He slammed his leather briefcase onto the table, the sound echoing off the cinder block walls like a gunshot. "You have lost your mind," Harlan. Mitch said, not even sitting down. He paced the small room, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. I have defended you against zoning boards. I have defended you against cattle rustlers. But I cannot defend you against insanity. You pulled a gun on your son-in-law at the altar, in front of half the town, in front of the mayor. Do you have any idea what kind of mess we are in? I leaned back, the handcuffs clinking. Sit down, Mitch, I said, my voice hoarse. My throat felt like I had swallowed a handful of desert sand. I didn't shoot him. I just stopped a crime. A crime, Mitch laughed, a dry, humorless sound. The only crime committed today was aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and it was committed by you. They are talking about a psychiatric evaluation, Harlan. They think you have finally cracked. The grief, the isolation on the ranch, they think it finally got to you. Braden is pressing charges. He says you are a danger to yourself and others. Let him talk, I said quietly. I need you to listen. Really listen, Mitch. You know me. You know I don't spook easily. You know I don't draw my weapon unless there is a threat. Mitch stopped pacing. He pulled out the metal chair opposite me and sat down, leaning across the table. His eyes were tired, filled with worry rather than anger now. Convince me, Harlan, he whispered. Because right now, from where I am sitting, you look like an old man who couldn't let his little girl go. Tell me why I shouldn't let them take you to the state hospital tonight. I took a deep breath. I needed to make him see. I needed to take him back to where the rot started. It wasn't at the church. It wasn't even the week before. It started 90 days ago, I told him. The first time Braden Cole drove up my driveway. I closed my eyes and the memory washed over me clear as day. The smell of the interrogation room vanished, replaced by the scent of wet earth and sagebrush. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was out by the north pasture fixing a section of barbed wire that a bull had torn through the night before. My hands were covered in grease and rust, my boots caked in mud. That was when I heard it. A low, aggressive growl of an engine that didn't belong in Montana. It wasn't the rattle of a diesel truck or the whine of a tractor. It was the purr of high-performance engineering. I looked up to see a bright red sports car low to the ground, navigating the potholes of my dirt road. It looked ridiculous, like a spaceship landing in a cow pasture. The car bottomed out on a rock, and I heard the sickening crunch of expensive metal hitting gravel. I didn't wince. In fact, I might have smiled a little. The car stopped in front of the main house. The door opened, and out stepped Braden Cole. I had seen photos of him on Lily's phone, but seeing him in person was different. He was wearing white loafers. Who wears white loafers to a cattle ranch in November? He stepped out, and his foot immediately sank 2 inches into a patch of soft mud. He looked down, his face twisting in disgust for a split second, before he plastered on a smile that was too wide, too bright, and entirely fake. I walked over, wiping my hands on a rag, not hurrying. I wanted him to wait. I wanted him to feel the wind and see the dust. Mr. West, Braden called out, waving as if we were old friends. What a magnificent drive. The air out here is so fresh. It really clears the lungs. I reached him and didn't offer my hand. I held up my grease-stained rag instead. You are lost, son, I said. The highway is 5 miles back that way. Oh, I'm not lost, he laughed, a practiced hollow sound. I'm Braden. Lily's Braden. She told you I was coming to ask for your blessing, didn't she? He reached into the passenger seat and pulled out a wooden box. He navigated the mud, carefully tiptoeing, like a cat avoiding water, and held the box out to me. I took the liberty of bringing a little peace offering, he said. It is a bottle of Chateau Margaux, vintage 2005. It is worth about $500, but for the father of the woman I love, nothing is too good. I took the box. It was heavy. $500 for a bottle of fermented grape juice. I drank whiskey that cost $20 a handle. This wasn't a gift. It was a bribe. It was a statement. It said, "Look at how much money I have. Look at how sophisticated I am compared to you." "Come inside," I said, more out of obligation than hospitality. We walked into the living room. It was a simple room filled with furniture that my wife and I had bought 40 years ago. The leather on the armchair was cracked. The rug was faded, but it was home. The walls were covered with photos. Lily winning the county spelling bee. Lily on her first horse. My wife Sarah smiling from the porch swing. Most people, when they come into a home for the first time, they look at the photos. They try to understand the family they are trying to join. Braden didn't. He walked right past the shrine of memories on the mantelpiece. His eyes didn't even flicker toward Lily's graduation picture. Instead, he walked straight to the far wall. Hanging there was the geological survey map of the West Ranch. It was a large, detailed map showing the property lines, the creek beds, the elevation drops, and the mineral rights boundaries. It was a tool for work, not a decoration. Braden stood in front of that map. He put his hands in his pockets and stared at it. He wasn't looking at it like a guest admiring a quirky wall hanging. He was studying it. His eyes were scanning the contour lines, tracing the path of the river. "You have got quite a bit of frontage on the river." Braden set his back to me. "And these elevation changes here on the East Ridge that offers a spectacular view of the valley, doesn't it?" "It is good for grazing," I said, placing the wine bottle on the table with a thud. "The wind hits hard up there in winter. Not good for much else." Braden turned around. The mask slipped for just a second. I saw a flash of calculation in his eyes, cold and mathematical. He wasn't seeing grazing land. He wasn't seeing the legacy of 3 generations of West men who had bled into this soil. He was seeing square footage. He was seeing development potential. He smiled again, but this time I noticed it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Grazing. But surely a property this size, this close to the national park. It must be a burden for one man to manage alone. Have you ever thought about diversifying?" That was the moment, Mitch. Right there. I felt a cold chill go down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the drafty windows. My gut, that same instinct that kept me alive in the jungle 50 years ago, screamed at me. This man didn't want my daughter. He wanted my dirt. I looked at Mitch across the interrogation table. He was listening now, his brow furrowed. He came into my house, drank my coffee, and never once asked me what Lily was like as a child, I told Mitch. He asked me about the water rights. He asked me if the zoning laws allowed for commercial structures. He asked me if I had a current land survey. Mitch sighed, rubbing his temples. "Harlan, that makes him a greedy yuppie. It makes him an opportunist. It doesn't make him a criminal worthy of being held at gunpoint." I leaned forward, the chains rattling again. "I am not finished, Mitch. That was just the handshake. You want to know why I pulled that gun? You need to know what I found when I started digging. Because after that dinner, after he left in his fancy red car, I didn't go to sleep. I went to the town hall. And what I found there wasn't just greed. It was theft. And it had my daughter's name all over it. The dinner that followed was less of a meal and more of an inspection. Lily had spent all afternoon cooking her mother's recipe for pot roast, the house filled with the warm, comforting scent of rosemary and slow-cooked beef. It was the smell of my childhood, the smell of every Sunday gathering for 50 years. But when Braden returned with his mother, Veronica, the atmosphere in the dining room curdled instantly. Veronica Cole was a woman who wore her insecurity like a shield of diamonds. She walked into my log cabin home wearing a fur coat that probably cost more than my tractor. She didn't take it off, claiming a chill in the air, despite the roaring fire I had built in the hearth. She sat at my grandmother's solid oak table, running a manicured finger over the wood, checking for dust. "This is quaint," she said, looking around at the exposed beams and the simple cotton curtains. "It is very rustic. Do you not have central heating?" "Mr. West." "We have a fireplace," I said, serving the roast. "And we have wool blankets. That has kept us warm since 1920. Veronica smiled, a tight pursing of lips that didn't reach her eyes. She looked down at the food Lily placed in front of her. She poked a piece of carrot with her fork, as if it were a live insect. "Oh, red meat," she sighed. "Braden, darling, you know my dietitian says red meat is terribly inflammatory. Do you have any sparkling water or perhaps a light salad?" Lily's face fell. I saw the light go out of her eyes. She had worked so hard on this meal, trying to impress the woman who might become her mother-in-law. "I will get you some water." "Mrs. Cole." Lily said, her voice small. "Sit down, Lily," I said, my voice firm. "The water comes from the tap. It is mountain spring water, the cleanest you will ever drink. And the beef comes from the herd outside. It is not inflammatory. It is food. Real food." Braden laughed, a sharp, nervous sound that cut through the tension. He reached over and patted his mother's hand, then gave me that same practiced grin. "Mom is just used to city dining." "Harlan," he said, "do not take it personally. But actually, that brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you. Something exciting." He pushed his plate away, barely touched. He leaned his elbows on the table, clasping his hands together like he was about to lead a board meeting. "I have been looking at the market trends, Harlan. Traditional cattle ranching. It is a dying industry. The margins are thin, the labor is brutal, and the environmental impact is getting harder to justify to the government." I stopped chewing. I put my fork down slowly. "Is that so?" I asked. Braden nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. But you are sitting on a gold mine. I have some partners in the city, very forward-thinking people. They are investing heavily in green agriculture and ecotourism. We are talking about luxury glamping sites, solar energy farms on the South Ridge, maybe even a boutique winery." He gestured around the room, encompassing my entire life in a sweep of his hand. "Imagine Harlan. No more waking up at 4 in the morning to feed stock in a blizzard. No more worrying about beef prices. We could upgrade this entire facility. We could turn West Ranch into the premier sustainable destination in Montana. The capital injection would be significant. You could retire in style. You could move to Florida, buy a condo, play golf." The room went silent. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside, rattling the window panes. I looked at Lily. She was watching Braden with adoration, swallowing his words like they were gospel. She thought he was trying to save me from hard work. She didn't see what I saw. I looked at the window. Beyond the glass in the dark lay 2,000 acres of land. I knew every rock, every tree, every bend in the creek. I knew where the deer bedded down in winter. I knew where the eagles nested. And I remembered the night Sarah died. It was 10 years ago in the bedroom just down the hall. The cancer had taken her strength, but not her spirit. She had grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, one last time. "Promise me, Harlan," she had whispered. "Promise me you will keep it wild. This land isn't ours. We are just taking care of it for the next generation. Don't let them pave it. Don't let them turn it into a parking lot." I had promised. I had sworn it on her soul. I looked back at Braden. I saw past the expensive suit and the white teeth. I saw a man who didn't know the difference between a steer and a heifer, telling me how to run my heritage. He used words like sustainable and green, but I knew what he meant. He meant concrete. He meant fences to keep people out. He meant destroying the very thing that made this place sacred just to squeeze a profit out of it. I picked up my wine glass, took a sip, and set it down. "No," I said. Braden blinked. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Excuse me," I said. "No." I repeated, keeping my voice level. "I am not interested in glamping. I am not interested in solar farms covering my grazing lands. And I am certainly not interested in playing golf in Florida." Braden chuckled, but the sound was colder now. Harlan, be reasonable. I am trying to help you. You are sitting on an asset that is depreciating. I am offering you a lifeline. My land is not an asset, I said, leaning forward. It is a living thing. It feeds people. It provides a home for wildlife. My father died on that south ridge. My wife is buried under the willow tree by the creek. You do not upgrade a grave, Braden. You honor it. Veronica let out a sharp sigh of exasperation. Oh, for heaven's sake, she snapped. Do not be so melodramatic. Braden is offering to turn this mud pit into something civilized. You should be thanking him, not lecturing him about ghosts. Mom, please, Braden said, silencing her with a sharp look. He turned back to me. I watched his face change. It was subtle, like a cloud passing over the sun, but I saw it. The warmth evaporated from his expression. His jaw tightened. And for the first time I saw the predator behind the mask. His eyes, which had been crinkling with fake good humor, went flat and hard. They were the eyes of a man who was not used to hearing the word no. He picked up his wineglass and swirled the liquid, watching the red vortex. You are a proud man, Harlan, he said softly. I respect that. Really, I do. But pride is expensive. Sometimes it costs more than we can afford. The world is changing. You can either change with it, or you can get run over. Are you threatening me, son? I asked. Braden laughed again, and the charm slammed back into place like a steel shutter. Of course not. I am just giving you business advice. We are family almost. I just want what is best for Lily, and for you. Think about it. That is all I ask. Just think about it. He raised his glass in a mock toast. To the future, he said. I didn't raise my glass. I just stared at him. My gut was twisting in knots. This wasn't a business proposal. It was a declaration of intent. He had walked into my home, insulted my life, and told me he was going to erase my history. And the worst part was looking at Lily. She was frowning at me, disappointed. She thought I was being a stubborn old mule. She didn't hear the threat in his voice. She didn't see the shark swimming in his eyes. That dinner ended early, but as I watched the taillights of that ridiculous red car disappear down my driveway, I knew one thing for certain. Braden Cole wasn't going to take no for an answer. He was going to come back. And next time he wouldn't be bringing wine. He would be bringing a war. I stood on the porch in the cold wind, listening to the silence of the ranch. It felt fragile suddenly. I realized I was old. I was alone. And I was standing in the way of a man who looked at my home and saw nothing but a pile of money waiting to be counted. That night, I cleaned my gun for the first time in years. Not because I wanted to use it, but because for the first time since Vietnam, I felt like I was in enemy territory. And I was right. Because the next morning, the attacks began. And they didn't start with guns. They started with the one thing I couldn't shoot. They started with the law. The weeks that followed that dinner were quiet, but it was the silence of a hunter waiting in a blind. I knew Braden was not done, but I did not expect the war to come to my doorstep so literally. It happened 2 months before the wedding on a Tuesday morning that smelled of frost and coming snow. I was out on the western perimeter of the ranch. That section of the property is my favorite. It is where the creek bends sharply against the limestone cliffs, creating a natural barrier that has stood for centuries. But as I drove my old pickup truck along the fence line checking for brakes, I saw something that made my blood boil. The barbed wire 3 strands thick had been cut. It wasn't a clean break from a rusted post or a snap from a spooked elk. The wire had been snipped with bolt cutters, the bright metal ends gleaming in the sun like fresh wounds. I stopped the truck and got out my boots, crunching on the frozen grass. I ran my gloved hand over the severed wire. This was not an accident. This was a breach. Then I heard it. A high-pitched whining buzz like a swarm of angry hornets. I looked up, squinting against the glare of the morning sun. Hovering about 50 feet above my head was a drone. It was a sleek black machine with a camera lens that looked like an unblinking eye staring down at me, staring down at my land. I followed the line of the drone's flight path back toward the ridge. There, parked just inside my property line, were 2 black SUVs. Standing next to them were 4 men in suits. They looked like crows feasting on roadkill. One of them was holding a controller looking at a tablet screen. They were filming my land. They were mapping it. I did not yell. I did not wave my arms. I reached into the gun rack behind the seat of my truck and pulled out my Remington 870 shotgun. I didn't load a shell into the chamber, but the sound of the pump action, racking back and forth, is a language that everyone understands. It is the universal sound of "get out." I jumped back into the truck and slammed on the gas. The tires spun, kicking up mud and gravel as I roared toward them. I saw their heads snap up. The man with the controller fumbled, and the drone wobbled in the air. Good. Let them be scared. I skidded to a halt 10 yards from their shiny vehicles. I stepped out, the shotgun held low across my chest. I didn't point it at them, but I made sure they saw it. "Private property," I shouted, my voice carrying over the wind. "Can you boys not read, or do you just think the laws do not apply to you?" The men exchanged glances. They were young, polished, the kind of men who spent more on haircuts than I spent on groceries. But one of them, a heavy-set man in a gray coat, stepped forward. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. "Put the weapon away, Mr. West," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We are conducting a preliminary environmental survey. We are not trespassing. We are on the easement." "There is no easement here," I spat back, taking a step forward. "The county road ends 2 miles back. You cut my fence. That is destruction of private property. That is criminal trespass. Now land that drone and get your tires off my grass before I call the sheriff, or before I decide to start target practice on that flying toy of yours." The man in the gray coat smirked. It was a nasty, condescending little smile. "You really are as volatile as they say, aren't you?" he said, shaking his head. "Go ahead. Shoot the drone. It is recording everything. A video of Harlan West waving a gun at unarmed surveyors will play very well in court. It will prove exactly what we need to prove." I froze. What did he mean, as they say? Who was talking about me? I looked closer at the man in the gray coat. The sun had been in my eyes before, but now, as the clouds shifted, I recognized him. It was Paul Henderson. He was a loan officer at the First National Bank in town. I had sat across from him 5 years ago, asking for a small loan to fix the barn roof. He had denied me, claiming my debt-to-income ratio was too risky. "What are you doing here, Henderson?" I asked, my grip tightening on the shotgun. "You are a banker. Since when do bankers cut fences and fly drones?" Henderson's smile widened. He knew I had recognized him. "I am a consultant now, Mr. West," he said smoothly. "I advise investors on high-value acquisitions. And let me tell you, your property is very high value, or it will be once it is under competent management. We are just getting the lay of the land for the future owners." Future owners. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I am the owner, and I am not selling. Henderson laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "Foreclosure is a nasty business, Harlan. Sometimes when a property is distressed or when the owner is deemed incapable, the bank has to step in to protect the asset. We are just being proactive." He was talking about declaring me incompetent. He was talking about the same thing Braden had hinted at during dinner. This wasn't just a survey. This was an appraisal for a hostile takeover. They were building a case that I was too old, too crazy, and too poor to keep the land. "Get out," I whispered. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I raised the shotgun barrel just an inch, Not enough to be a direct threat, but enough to show I was done talking. "Get off my land." Henderson raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. We are leaving. We have got what we need anyway." He signaled to the drone operator. The machine buzzed down and landed. They packed up their equipment with infuriating slowness, watching me the whole time. As Henderson got into his SUV, he rolled down the window. "You can patch the fence, Harlan," he called out. "But you cannot patch the holes in your bank account. Time is ticking." I watched them drive away, the dust settling on the grass. I stood there for a long time, the shotgun heavy in my arms. I felt violated. It wasn't just the fence. It was the fact that a man I had known for years, a man from my own town, was conspiring with outsiders to take what was mine. Braden wasn't working alone. He had recruited the locals. He had turned my neighbors into his soldiers. I spent the rest of the afternoon fixing the fence. My hands shook as I twisted the wire, not from the cold, but from rage. I was being hunted. But the real blow didn't come from the bankers. It came that evening when Lily drove up. I was in the kitchen cleaning the mud off my boots. I heard her car door slam hard. She didn't knock. She burst through the front door, her face flushed, red tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad," she screamed. "What is wrong with you?" I looked up, startled. "Lily." "What happened?" She marched into the kitchen and threw her purse on the table. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "Braden just called me," she cried. "He said you pulled a gun on his investors. He said you threatened Mr. Henderson from the bank. Are you trying to ruin everything?" "They were trespassing, Lily," I said, standing up. "They cut the west fence. They were flying a drone over the house. Henderson threatened me. He said, 'Stop it!'" Lily shouted, cutting me off. She put her hands over her ears like a child trying to block out a scolding. "Just stop with the conspiracy theories. There was no drone. They didn't cut the fence. Braden said they stopped by to say hello and ask permission to look at the view, and you chased them off like a maniac." I stared at her. The lie was so bold, so complete, I didn't know how to answer. "Lily," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm. "I fixed the wire myself. I saw the drone. Why would I lie to you?" "Because you are old," she sobbed. "Because you are scared of change." Braden told me about the early signs of dementia, paranoia, aggression, confabulation. "You are imagining enemies, Dad." Those men were potential partners for the resort project. They were going to bring millions of dollars to this family. And you waved a shotgun at them. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Braden is trying so hard to help us. He is trying to save this ranch from bankruptcy. And you are treating him like a villain. You are embarrassing me, Dad. You are embarrassing yourself. Everyone in town is talking about how crazy Harlan West has become." I reached out to touch her shoulder, but she flinched away from me. That flinch hurt more than any bullet could have. My own daughter, the girl I taught to ride, the girl I carried on my shoulders, was looking at me like I was a dangerous stranger. "Braden has gotten into your head, Lily," I said softly. "He is using you." "No," she whispered, backing away toward the door. "He loves me, and he is the only one who sees the truth. You need help, Dad. Real help. If you do anything like this again, if you threaten his friends again, I won't be able to stop him from calling the authorities." She turned and ran out of the house. I heard her car start up and speed away, leaving me alone in the silence of the kitchen. I sat down at the table, putting my head in my hands. The room felt cold. The fire had gone out. They had cut my fence, yes, but that was nothing. Today, Braden had cut something far more important. He had severed the bond between a father and his daughter. He had turned my protector instinct into a weapon against me. He had convinced Lily that my love was madness and his greed was salvation. I realized then that I couldn't win this by fighting fair. I couldn't win this with guns or shouting matches. They had the money, they had the law, and now they had my daughter. I needed to be smarter. If they wanted to play games with surveillance, if they wanted to use technology to spy on me, then two could play at that game. Henderson had mentioned the bank. He had mentioned a timeline. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark outline of the barn. I wasn't senile. I wasn't paranoid. And I was going to prove it. I went to the closet and pulled out my old tackle box. But instead of fishing lures, I reached for a notepad and a pen. I wrote down a name. Mitch O'Connell. My old friend Mitch was the only lawyer in town who hadn't been bought by the developers yet. And then I wrote down another name. A name from my past life in the service. A man who knew how to find things that people wanted to keep hidden. If Braden wanted to film my life, I was going to start filming his. And I had a feeling that what I would find wouldn't be a scenic view. It would be a crime scene. The house had never been this quiet. Even after Sarah died, there was always the sound of Lily. Her music coming from upstairs, the clatter of her baking pans in the kitchen, the hum of her sewing machine. But now the silence was absolute. It was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Lily had packed her bags 3 days after the argument about the drone. She didn't say goodbye. She just left a note on the counter that said, "I need space, Dad. Braden understands me." She moved into his sleek, glass-walled condo in the city, leaving me alone with the ghosts of my past and the cattle that needed feeding. Every time I walked past her empty room, I felt a fresh stab of betrayal. But amidst the pain, a cold, hard resolve was forming. If Braden thought isolating me would make me give up, he didn't know Harlan West. Isolation doesn't break a soldier. It sharpens him. I waited until Wednesday, the day the county records office was quietest. I put on my town clothes, a clean flannel shirt and my good boots, and drove into town. I wasn't going there to pay taxes. I was going on a reconnaissance mission. The county clerk's office was in the basement of the old courthouse, a place that smelled of stale coffee and decaying paper. Sitting behind the high counter was Martha, a woman I had known since we were in diapers. She was the gatekeeper of this town's secrets, and luckily, she still had a soft spot for me. "Harlan," she said, looking over her reading glasses, "you look like you have been wrestling bears. What brings you down to the dungeon?" "I need a favor, Martha," I said, leaning in close. "I need to see the zoning applications for the last 6 months, specifically anything related to the West Valley." Martha frowned. "You know those are public record, but the pending ones are usually kept in the back until the council votes. Why is Braden planning something big?" So even Martha knew. The whole town was whispering. "Just a hunch," I said. "Can you let me take a peek, for old time's sake and for Sarah?" She hesitated, looking at the door to the supervisor's office. Then she sighed and reached under the counter for a key ring. "5 minutes, Harlan. If the boss comes in, you are just asking about property tax rates." She led me to the back room, a maze of metal filing cabinets. She pointed to a drawer marked, "Pending Commercial Development." I pulled it open. The metal runners screeched a sound that made me wince. I flipped through the manila folders. Johnson's Barn expansion. The new gas station on Route 9. And then there it was. A thick red folder labeled West Hills Resort and Casino. My heart hammered against my ribs. Casino Braden hadn't mentioned a casino. He had talked about ecotourism. He had talked about glamping. I opened the file. The first page was an architectural rendering. It was a monstrosity. A 10-story glass hotel rising out of my grazing pastures. A massive parking lot paving over the creek where I taught Lily to fish. Neon lights. A gaming floor. It looked like a slice of Las Vegas had been vomited onto the Montana landscape. I turned the page to the ownership structure. The applicant was listed as Cole West Holdings, LLC. I had never agreed to form a company with him. I scanned down to the bottom of the application. It was the section for the preliminary landowner consent. This was the document required to even start the zoning hearing process. Without the owner's signature, this file should have been thrown in the trash. But there at the bottom of the page was a signature. Harlan J. West. I stared at it. The ink was black bold. It looked like my signature. It had the sharp H, the crossed T. But as I leaned closer, squinting in the dim light of the file room, the room started to spin. It was a forgery. I knew I hadn't signed it. But it wasn't just any forgery. A stranger would have tried to copy the jagged arthritic slant of my writing. This signature was smoother. And there was a tell. The letter W in West. It had a tiny, almost invisible loop at the top of the first stroke. I stopped breathing. I knew that loop. I had seen it 1,000 times on permission slips, on birthday cards, on homework assignments. It was Lily's handwriting. My knees nearly gave out. I had to grab the edge of the filing cabinet to stay upright. The betrayal wasn't just that Braden had forged my name. It was that he had made my daughter do it. He had manipulated her, twisted her love and her fear until she committed a felony against her own father. I could hear his voice in my head, smooth and poisonous, whispering to her. "It is just a formality, babe. Your dad is stubborn, but this is for his own good. He will thank us later. Just sign it. We are saving him." Rage, hot and blinding, flooded my veins. He had turned my little girl into a criminal. He was using her as a shield, knowing that if I went to the police, I would be sending my own daughter to jail for fraud. It was a perfect trap. If I fought the project legally, I would have to expose the forgery. If I exposed the forgery, Lily would be prosecuted. I slammed the folder shut. My hands were shaking so hard, I could barely slide it back into the drawer. Harlan Martha whispered from the doorway. "You okay? You look pale." "I am fine, Martha." I rasped, though I felt like I was dying inside. I just saw something I wish I hadn't. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. The town looked different now. It looked hostile. Every person I passed, I wondered if they knew. Did the banker know? Did the mayor know? Were they all laughing at the old cowboy whose daughter was selling him out for a casino? I got into my truck, but I didn't start the engine. I sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I looked at the passenger seat where Lily used to sit when she was a kid, singing along to the radio. He had taken her. He had taken her mind, her loyalty, and now her integrity. I realized then that this wasn't just about land anymore. If Braden built that casino, he would destroy the valley. But if I let him get away with this, he would destroy Lily's soul. He would drag her down into his world of lies and debt until there was nothing left of the girl I raised. I reached for my phone. I needed to call someone who wouldn't be afraid of a casino developer or a corrupted zoning board. I dialed the number I had written down the night before. "Mitch," I said when he answered, "don't ask questions. I need you to find out everything you can about Braden Cole's debts. And I need the name of the FBI agent who handled the racketeering case in the next county last year." "Harlan, what did you find?" Mitch asked, his voice low. "I found out that I am not fighting a businessman," I said, staring at the courthouse. "I am fighting a parasite, and I am going to burn him out before he kills my host." I hung up. I started the truck. The engine roared to life, a deep, angry growl. I drove back to the empty ranch, but the silence didn't scare me anymore. Because now I had a mission. I wasn't just saving my home. I was saving my daughter from herself. And God help anyone who stood in my way. 2 days after I called Mitch, the devil came back to my doorstep. But this time he did not bring wine. He did not bring his mother. And he certainly did not bring any smiles. Braden Cole walked into my house without knocking, pushing open the heavy oak door as if he already owned the place. He was not wearing his white loafers this time. He was wearing heavy work boots and a dark coat, looking like an undertaker who had come to collect a body. I was sitting at the kitchen table nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I did not stand up. I did not offer him a seat. I just watched him over the rim of my mug, my hand instinctively dropping below the table to check the knife I had started carrying in my boot. Braden didn't say a word. He walked straight to the table and threw a folder down in front of me. It wasn't a crisp, new legal folder like the ones he had at the town hall. This one was old. The manila cover was yellowed with age, the edges frayed, and it smelled of mildew and damp basements. It slid across the wood and hit my coffee mug with a dull thud. I looked down at the label typed on the front. Case number 492, October 14th, 1998. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very thin. I didn't need to open the folder to know what was inside. I knew every page, every photo, every line of text by heart, even though I hadn't seen it in 20 years. 1998. The year the rains didn't stop. The year the creek rose so high it threatened to swallow the barn. And the night a man named Ray Jenkins broke into my home. I looked up at Braden. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching my face with the intensity of a hawk watching a field mouse. "Go ahead," he said, his voice devoid of that fake warmth he used on Lily. "Open it. Remind yourself of what kind of man you really are." I reached out my fingers, brushing the rough paper. I flipped it open. The first thing I saw was a crime scene photo. It was grainy black and white, but in my mind it was vivid red. It showed the hallway of this very house, shattered glass from the back door, muddy footprints, and a body lying face down on the floorboards, a pool of dark liquid spreading around it. I closed my eyes, and for a second I wasn't in the kitchen with Braden. I was back there. I could hear the thunder shaking the house. I could hear the sound of the glass breaking, shocking me out of a deep sleep. I remembered grabbing my service pistol from the nightstand. I remembered running into the hallway, the adrenaline pumping so hard my vision blurred. I saw him, Jenkins. He was a drifter, a man eaten alive by methamphetamines. He had a crowbar in his hand. He was screaming something incoherent, something about money, about demons. I shouted at him to stop. He lunged. I didn't want to shoot. I swear on my wife's grave I didn't want to shoot. We grappled. The smell of him, sweat and chemicals and rot, filled my nose. He swung the crowbar. I raised the gun to block it. We fell. The gun went off. The silence that followed that gunshot was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It was ruled an accident. Self-defense during a struggle. Sheriff Miller, a good man who knew I wasn't a killer, closed the case. He knew Jenkins was dangerous. He knew I was protecting my wife and a sleeping 8-year-old Lily upstairs. I opened my eyes and looked at Braden. "This is a closed case," I said, my voice steady, though my stomach was churning. "It was an accident. The coroner ruled it accidental discharge during a struggle." "Why are you showing me this?" Braden laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was dry and sharp. "Accident. That is a funny word, Harlan. It suggests no intent. It suggests you were a victim. But you are a Marine, aren't you? A trained killer. Do Marines really have accidents with their weapons at point-blank range?" He walked over to the chair opposite me and sat down, leaning in close. I could smell mints on his breath, masking the scent of expensive tobacco. "I did some digging, Harlan. I found something Sheriff Miller missed. Or maybe something he conveniently ignored because you were drinking buddies." He pulled a single sheet of paper from his inner pocket and placed it on top of the old file. It was an affidavit, a sworn statement. Dated 3 days ago. I read the name at the bottom. Silas Vane. I didn't know the name. "Who is Silas Vane?" I asked. Braden smiled. "Silas is a very interesting man. He was waiting in the woods that night. He was Jenkins's partner. He didn't come in because he was the lookout. He saw everything through the window, Harlan." I felt the blood drain from my face. That was a lie. There was no one else. I had checked the perimeter. The mud was undisturbed outside the window. "You are lying," I whispered. "There was no one else." Braden shrugged. "Does it matter? Silas says he was there. And Silas is prepared to testify under oath. Do you want to know what he says? He says Jenkins was on his knees. He says Jenkins had dropped the crowbar. He says he was begging for his life. And he says you—" Harlan West looked him in the eye and pulled the trigger. "That is not self-defense. That is execution. That is murder in the first degree." I stood up my chair, scraping violently against the floor. "That is a lie," I roared. I slammed my fist onto the table. I fought him. He was going to kill Sarah. Braden didn't flinch. He just looked up at me, calm as a frozen lake. "It is his word against yours," he said softly. "And let's look at the optics. You are an angry, isolated old man who waves shotguns at bankers. You have a history of violence, and now a witness comes forward. Who do you think a jury will believe? The grieving friend of the victim, or the man who is already being investigated for assaulting a surveyor?" He stood up too, buttoning his coat. "Here is the deal, Harlan. I am generous. I don't want to see my father-in-law die in prison. It would be bad for the family image." He tapped the file with his index finger. "You sign the transfer papers for the ranch. You sign the consent for the rezoning. You do it tomorrow. If you do, Silas Vane disappears. He goes back to whatever hole he crawled out of with a pocket full of cash, and this file goes into the fire." He paused, letting the silence stretch out. "But if you don't, if you decide to be stubborn, then I hand this affidavit to the district attorney on Monday morning. They will exhume the body. They will reopen the case, and you will be arrested." He walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. His face was in shadow, but I could feel the malice radiating off him. "Think about Lily Harlan. She loves you. Imagine how she will feel watching her hero, her daddy, being handcuffed and led away for murder. Imagine her visiting you in a cage for the rest of your short life. Do you really want to put her through that? Just for some dirt?" He opened the door. The cold wind rushed in, blowing the papers on the table. "You have 24 hours, old man. Tick-tock." The door slammed shut. I stood there in the kitchen, trembling. Not from fear for myself. I had faced death before. I wasn't afraid of dying. But the thought of Lily seeing me as a murderer, the thought of her believing that lie, it broke me. He had cornered me. If I fought him, I went to prison, and he got the land anyway. If I submitted, I lost the land, but I stayed free. I looked down at the photo of the dead man. Braden had weaponized my trauma. He had turned my darkest night into a bargaining chip. I sank back into the chair. I felt old. I felt defeated. For the first time, I thought about signing. I reached for the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. But then I saw something. In the old crime scene photo in the corner of the frame, there was a window. The window Braden claimed the witness had looked through. I pulled the photo closer, squinting. It was dark, but the flash of the police camera had illuminated the glass. The curtains. Sarah had made those curtains. They were thick, heavy velvet. And that night, I remembered. Sarah always closed them at sunset. If the curtains were closed, no one could have seen inside. Silas Vane was a liar. Braden was bluffing. But proving it, that was a different matter. A jury might not notice the curtains. A paid witness could lie about anything. I needed to know who Silas Vane was. I needed to find him before Monday. I put the pen down. I grabbed my jacket. I wasn't going to sign. I was going to hunt. Braden thought he had checkmated me with a ghost of from the past. Oh, but he forgot one thing about ghosts. If you shine a bright enough light on them, they disappear. I walked out into the night, the wind biting at my face. I was going to find this Silas Vane, and I was going to make him tell me the truth, even if I had to drag it out of him. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to the trenches. The drive to the city usually took an hour, but that night I made it in 40 minutes. My old truck rattled and complained as I pushed it past 70 on the highway, the dashboard lights flickering in protest. I called Lily's phone 5 times, then 10, then 20. Each time it went straight to voicemail. That cheerful greeting she had recorded years ago, the one where she laughed and told the caller to leave a message after the beep, sounded like a ghost recording now. It was the voice of a girl who didn't know what it felt like to be trapped. I arrived at the address Braden had given me once, a place he called the Pinnacle. It was a monstrosity of glass and steel rising out of the downtown district, cold and imposing. I parked my truck between a Mercedes and a Tesla, looking like a relic from another century. The doorman tried to stop me, eyeing my worn denim jacket and mud-stained boots, but there is a look a father gets when his child is in danger that can freeze a man in his tracks. I walked right past him to the elevators. The ride up to the penthouse was silent and suffocating. My reflection in the polished metal doors looked haggard. My eyes were bloodshot, my jaw set so hard my teeth ached. I wasn't going there to fight. I was going there to beg if I had to. I needed to know whose side she was on. I needed to know if she had really chosen a casino over her own home. I pounded on the door of apartment 40B. For a long time there was no answer. I raised my fist to knock again, harder this time, when I heard the lock click. The door opened just a crack. Lily stood there. She was wearing a long silk robe wrapped tight around her body, as if she were freezing, even though the apartment was stiflingly warm. The lights were dim behind her. "Dad," she whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle. "You shouldn't be here. Braden will be home soon." I pushed the door open gently but firmly. I didn't barge in, but I didn't let her close it either. "I am not leaving until I see you, Lily," I said. "We need to talk." He came to the ranch. He showed me the file. Lily's eyes widened. She backed away from the door, letting me step into the living room. It was exactly as I imagined Braden's home would be. White leather couches, abstract art that looked like spilled ink, and a view of the city lights that felt lonely rather than beautiful. There were no photos here, no warmth, just expensive things on display. "He showed you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," I said, watching her carefully. "He told me about the witness. He told me I have to sign the papers or go to prison, and he told me you agree with him." Lily turned away from me, walking toward the window. She crossed her arms over her chest, hugging herself. "You have to sign, Dad," she said to the glass. "Please, just sign the papers. The land isn't worth your life. It isn't worth dying in a cell." "Is that what this is about?" I asked, taking a step toward her. "You think he is saving me, Lily? He is the one holding the gun. He is the one blackmailing us. How can you stand by him? How can you forge my signature on those documents and sleep at night?" She spun around then. Her face was twisted in anguish, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't have a choice," she cried. She threw her hands up in frustration, and as she did, the loose sleeve of her silk robe slipped down her right arm. I froze. There on her forearm, just above the wrist, was a mark. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't dirt. It was a bruise. A deep, ugly purple welt that was turning yellow at the edges. It was the distinct shape of 3 fingers, the mark of a hand that had grabbed her too hard and refused to let go. And right in the center of it, there was a smear of beige cream, makeup. She had tried to cover it up with foundation, but the friction of her sleeve had rubbed it away. The world stopped spinning. The ranch, the casino, the blackmail file, it all faded into the background. All I could see was that bruise. I closed the distance between us in 2 strides. I grabbed her hand, gentle but firm, and pulled her arm into the light. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet. Lily tried to pull away, pulling her sleeve back down frantically. "It is nothing," she stammered. I bumped into the doorframe. "I am clumsy, you know that." "Don't lie to me," I barked, the command echoing off the sterile walls. "I raised you, Lily. I put band-aids on your scraped knees. I know what a bump looks like. And I know what a grip looks like. Did he do this?" Lily looked at me, her lower lip trembling. She opened her mouth to deny it again, to tell me another lie to protect the monster she was living with. But the look in my eyes must have stopped her. She crumbled. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a sob that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for months. "He didn't mean to," she whispered, the tears falling faster now. "He was just stressed. The investors are pressuring him. He just grabbed me to make me listen. He said he was sorry. He bought me a bracelet to cover it." I felt a darkness rise up inside me that I hadn't felt since the war. It was a cold, efficient rage. This man hadn't just stolen my land. He hadn't just threatened my freedom. He had put his hands on my daughter. He had hurt her. And then the second realization hit me, hitting harder than the first. I looked at her face, really looked at it. I saw the exhaustion, the terror, the desperation. I remembered the forged signature. I remembered how she had begged me to sell. "You didn't sign those papers because you wanted the money, did you?" I asked, my voice breaking. Lily shook her head violently. "No," she screamed. "I hate him. I hate this place. I want to come home, Dad. I want to sit on the porch and drink tea with you. I miss Mom. I miss everything." Then why, I asked, gripping her shoulders. "Why are you staying? Why did you help him? Because he has the tape," she shrieked. The room went silent. "What tape?" I asked. Lily took a ragged breath, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "The night he proposed," she said, her voice shaking. "We were drinking wine. I was so happy. I trusted him. I told him about the nightmares I used to have when I was a kid. About the night the robber died. I told him I remembered hearing you argue with the man before the gun went off. I told him I remembered you crying afterwards." She looked up at me, her eyes full of shame. "He recorded me, Dad. He had his phone recording the whole time. He has a recording of me saying that it wasn't an accident, that I heard things that contradict the police report. He said if I ever try to leave him, or if I don't help him get the ranch, he will edit the tape. He will make it sound like I confessed that you murdered that man in cold blood. He will send you to prison, and he will make me the witness that sends you there." She collapsed against my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "I am trying to save you, Dad. Don't you see I am just trying to keep you safe? If I leave, he destroys you. If I stay, maybe he will let us go once he gets the land." I held her. I held my little girl as she shook in my arms in that cold, expensive apartment that was nothing more than a prison cell. Everything shifted in that moment. For the last 3 months, I had been fighting a war for dirt. I had been fighting for legacy, for pride, for the past. I had been angry at Lily, thinking she was a traitor, thinking she was weak. But she wasn't weak. She was the strongest person I knew. She had walked into the lion's den and let the door lock behind her just to shield me. She had endured his touch, his shouting, and his violence, all to protect her old father from a past mistake. I looked over her shoulder at the city lights. They didn't look lonely anymore. They looked like targets. My motivation snapped into a new focus. This wasn't about the West Ranch anymore. Braden Cole could burn the ranch to the ground for all I cared. This was about the bruise on my daughter's arm. This was about the fear in her eyes. I pulled back and cupped her face in my rough hands. I wiped the tears from her cheeks with my thumbs. "Listen to me, Lily," I said, "and listen good. You are not going to stay here another night." "I can't leave," she whispered. "He will do it. He will release the tape." "Let him try," I said. My voice was calm now, terrifyingly calm. I didn't know the whole story before. I was fighting with one hand tied behind my back. But now I know where the enemy is. I kissed her forehead. "Pack a bag, Lily. Just the essentials. You are not coming with me tonight because that would tip him off. You are going to go to a hotel. I will pay cash. Use a fake name. But Dad, do as I say, I commanded, letting a bit of the Marine sergeant slip into my tone. I am going to end this. I am not going to sign those papers, and I am not going to prison. Braden thinks he has leverage. He thinks he is holding the cards, but he made a mistake. He hurt my child. I looked at the door. He wants a villain. He wants a violent old man. I am going to show him exactly what that looks like, but not in the way he thinks. I turned back to Lily. I love you, Pumpkin. I am sorry I didn't see it sooner. I am sorry I let you carry this alone. But the cavalry is here now. I walked out of that apartment. I didn't take the elevator. I took the stairs, all 40 flights, letting the burn in my legs fuel the fire in my gut. By the time I reached the lobby, I had a plan. It wasn't a legal plan. It wasn't a safe plan. It was a plan that involved wiretaps, deception, and walking straight into the line of fire. I got into my truck. I didn't drive home. I drove to the nearest electronics store. I needed audio equipment. I needed recording devices. Braden liked to record people without their consent, fine. I was going to turn his own favorite weapon against him. He wanted to play the game of surveillance. I was about to become the director of his downfall. And the final scene of this movie wasn't going to be my surrender. It was going to be his destruction. They say the best camouflage is to look exactly like what your enemy expects to see. Braden Cole expected to see a broken old man, a cowboy crushed by the weight of his past sins and the fear of losing his daughter. So for the next 3 days, that is exactly what I gave him. I went back to the ranch and I stopped shaving. I stopped fixing the fences. I took 3 bottles of cheap whiskey from the cupboard, poured the amber liquid down the kitchen sink, and scattered the empty glass bottles around the front porch. I made sure my clothes were wrinkled and stained. I even rubbed a little bourbon on my neck before he came over so I would smell like a man who had been drinking his breakfast. It was the hardest acting job of my life. Every fiber of my being wanted to stand tall, to clean my rifle on the front porch, to show him that a Marine does not surrender. But I knew that pride would lose this war. Deception would win it. I called Braden on a Thursday morning, my voice deliberately slurred. I told him I was done fighting. I told him I was tired. I told him to bring the papers on the wedding day, and I would sign whatever he wanted, as long as he promised to burn that file from 1998. He arrived 2 hours later to gloat. He parked that red sports car right in front of the house, not worrying about the mud this time. He walked up the steps, kicked one of the empty whiskey bottles aside with a sneer, and looked at me slumped in the rocking chair. "You made the right choice, Harlan," he said, looking down at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "It is sad to see you like this, really. But it is for the best. You are obviously not capable of managing things anymore." I just nodded, keeping my head down, letting my hands shake a little. "Just promise me," I mumbled. "Promise me Lily will be safe." "She will be fine," he said, patting my shoulder with a hand that felt like a snake. "She will have everything she ever wanted." While he was busy lecturing me about my retirement home options in Florida, he didn't notice the beat-up plumbing van parked around the side of the barn. And he certainly didn't see Sam, my old recon buddy from the service, sliding out from under the chassis of his precious sports car. Sam was 68, but he could still move like a shadow. While I kept Braden talking about escrow accounts and zoning permits, Sam was planting a military-grade listening device directly under the driver's seat, wired into the car's own power supply, so it would never run out of battery. Braden left 20 minutes later, feeling like the king of the world. He thought he had conquered the West Ranch. He didn't know he was driving away with a wiretap that would broadcast his every word directly to the receiver sitting on my kitchen table. For the next 48 hours, I lived in headphones. I sat in my darkened kitchen drinking black coffee, listening to the life of the man who stole my daughter. I heard him singing along to bad pop music. I heard him ordering expensive sushi. I heard him berating his wedding planner about the color of the napkins. It was mundane, boring, and infuriating. But I waited. In the jungle, you learn that the target always reveals himself eventually. You just have to be patient enough to be there when he does. The breakthrough happened late Friday night. The sun had gone down and the only light in my kitchen came from the small green LED on the receiver. I heard the car door slam shut. I heard the engine start. Braden was driving. Then the Bluetooth chimed, indicating an outgoing call. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. It was a deep, gravelly voice. Not a businessman, not a banker. This was the voice of a man who broke legs for a living. "Yeah," the voice said. "It is me," Braden said. His voice was different now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a nervous, eager tone. "I just wanted to update you, Mr. Ricci. Everything is on track for Saturday." Mr. Ricci. I wrote the name down on a notepad. That sounded like East Coast organized crime. What was a guy like that doing with a Montana land deal? "It better be on track," Kid Ricci growled. "We have moved a lot of capital to be ready for the groundbreaking. If you don't have that deed on Monday, you are going to have a very short honeymoon." "Don't worry," Braden laughed, but it sounded forced. "The old man is broken. I went over there today. He is a mess. Drunk at 10 in the morning. He agreed to sign everything at the reception. He thinks it is a trade. The land for his freedom," Good Ricci said. "And the daughter?" "She is under control," Braden said. "She is terrified. She thinks she is saving her daddy from prison. She will do whatever I say." There was a pause on the line. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would drown out the audio. And after the wedding, Ricci asked, "What about the old man?" "We can't have him wandering around making noise once the bulldozers show up. Locals get sentimental." "That is the best part," Braden said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "We are not just taking the land. We are taking him out of the equation permanently." "What do you mean? I have already spoken to Dr. Aris at the state psychiatric facility," Braden explained. "Given his recent public outbursts, the gun incident with the surveyors, and his current state of intoxication, once I have the marriage certificate, I become his next of kin legally if Lily declares him incompetent. And she will. I will make her sign the commitment papers the same time she signs the marriage license." I felt a cold chill freeze the blood in my veins. He wasn't just planning to steal my home. He was planning to lock me away. He was going to use the legal system to bury me in a padded room until I died, labeled a madman, so no one would believe a word I said about his crimes. I listened as he continued, his voice dripping with malice. "By Monday morning, Harlan West will be sedated in a secure ward. I will have power of attorney as his guardian. The transfer of the deed won't just be a sale, it will be a liquidation of assets to pay for his medical care. It is cleaner that way. No taxes. And the best part is, he thinks I am letting him retire to Florida." "You are a cold bastard," Cole Ricci laughed. "I like it. Just make sure the ink is dry before you call the guys in white coats." "Absolutely," Braden said. "See you at the wedding. I reserved the front row for you." The line went dead. I sat there in the silence of my kitchen, slowly taking off the headphones. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. Not anymore. I was trembling with the sheer magnitude of the evil I was facing. He was going to gaslight me into an asylum. He was going to make my daughter sign the papers to commit her own father, making her live with that guilt for the rest of her life. It was a masterstroke of cruelty. It was perfect. But he had made one mistake. He had said it out loud. I looked at the recording device. The red light was still blinking. I had it. Every word. Every threat. The conspiracy to commit fraud. The plan for false imprisonment. The connection to organized crime. I rewound the tape and played it back just to be sure. Hearing his voice say, "I will have power of attorney as his guardian." I didn't need to act drunk anymore. I stood up and walked to the sink. I splashed cold water on my face, scrubbing away the smell of whiskey and the feeling of helplessness. I looked at myself in the mirror. The eyes staring back were clear, sharp, and dangerous. I picked up my phone and dialed Mitch. It was 2 in the morning, but I knew he would answer. "Wake up, Mitch," I said when he picked up. "Harlan, are you okay?" "You sound—" "I am better than okay," I said, watching the moon rise over the barn. "I am ready. I need you to meet me at the sheriff's office in 1 hour. And bring your best suit. We are going to a wedding tomorrow, but we are not going there to celebrate. We are going there to execute a search warrant." I hung up the phone. I looked at the empty whiskey bottles on the floor and kicked them aside. The time for hiding was over. Braden Cole wanted a crazy old man. He was about to find out that the only thing crazier than a Marine with a grudge is a Marine with a plan. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was walk down the aisle and spring it. The coffee in Mitch's office had turned into a thick, bitter sludge hours ago, but neither of us stopped to brew a fresh pot. The clock on the wall ticked past 3 in the morning. Outside the window, the town was asleep, oblivious to the fact that 2 old men were sitting in a cloud of cigar smoke, plotting the destruction of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. Mitch O'Connell looked terrible. His tie was loosened, his eyes were red-rimmed, and his desk was buried under mountains of law books and case files. He rubbed his face with both hands, looking more like a man facing a firing squad than a lawyer preparing a defense. "Harlan," he said, his voice raspy from exhaustion. "We have a problem. A big one. I have looked at every angle of a restraining order. I have looked at filing for an emergency injunction against the rezoning. I have even drafted a fraud complaint regarding the forgery." He slammed a book shut, dust motes dancing in the lamplight. "But the law is slow. That is the problem. Braden knows this. If we file a lawsuit on Monday, it will take weeks to get a hearing. By then, he will have already triggered the mental health hold. He will have you committed, declared incompetent, and he will settle the suit on your behalf as your guardian. He has checkmated the legal system." I sat in the leather chair opposite him, staring at the map of my ranch spread out on the desk. I traced the line of the creek with my finger. "So, you are saying we lose," I said calmly. "You are saying there is no legal shield strong enough to stop him." Mitch leaned back, lighting another cigarette. He took a long drag and exhaled slowly toward the ceiling fan. "I am saying we can't use a shield, Harlan. A shield is defensive. Braden is expecting a defense. He is expecting us to fight for your rights, for your sanity, for your ownership." Mitch turned his chair and looked me dead in the eye. A strange, grim smile touched the corners of his mouth. "If you are trapped in a corner, Harlan, and you can't fight your way out, what do you do?" I thought about it. I thought about the jungle. I thought about being outnumbered. "You don't fight out," I said. "You call in an airstrike on your own position. You burn the ground so the enemy has nothing left to conquer." Mitch pointed a finger at me. "Exactly. We burn it down. Not with fire, but with paper." He reached into his drawer and pulled out a document I hadn't seen before. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a thick, bound contract with a green cover. "This is the nuclear option," Mitch said quietly. "It is called a conservation easement, specifically a charitable transfer to the Montana Land Trust." I picked up the document. The language was dense, full of legal jargon about perpetuity and stewardship. "Explain it to me in English, Mitch," I said. Mitch leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the trap. "Right now, your land is worth $40 million. Why? Because it can be developed. Because someone can come in, pour concrete, build a casino, and put up a parking lot. That potential is what Braden is borrowing against. That is what the mob wants. They don't want cows, Harlan. They want the development rights." He tapped the green folder. "If you sign this document, you are voluntarily donating the development rights of the West Ranch to a nonprofit conservation group. You are legally binding the land to remain in its natural state forever. No hotels, no casinos, no subdivisions. Not now. Not in 10 years. Not in 100 years. He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. The moment you sign this, and the moment I record it with the county clerk, the commercial value of your property drops from $40 million to agricultural value only, maybe 500,000. You strip the asset of its gold. You turn the diamond back into a lump of coal. I stared at the papers. I understood immediately what this meant. If I sign this, I can never sell it for retirement, I said. I can never cash out. Mitch nodded solemnly. Correct. You are destroying your own net worth. You are taking a fortune and lighting it on fire. You will still own the land. You can still live on it. You can still farm it. But you can never profit from destroying it. And neither can anyone else. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the dark street. I thought about the $40 million. It was more money than I could ever spend. It was security. It was power. But then I thought about Braden's voice on the tape. I thought about the bruise on Lily's arm. I thought about the casino lights blocking out the stars over the valley. Braden wasn't after the land because he loved it. He was after the money trapped inside the dirt. If I removed the money, I removed the motive. And more than that, I remembered Sarah. Promise me you will keep it wild, she had said. This document wasn't a loss. It was the ultimate fulfillment of that promise. It was an ironclad guarantee that no matter what happened to me, no matter if I died or went crazy or got thrown in prison, the land would remain safe. The trees would stand. The creek would run. I turned back to Mitch. Do it, I said. Mitch didn't hesitate. He flipped the document open to the signature page. He uncapped a heavy fountain pen and handed it to me. Are you sure, Harlan? He asked, his voice serious. Once you do this, there is no going back. You are wiping out your family inheritance. No, Mitch, I said, taking the pen. I am saving my family inheritance. The money was never the inheritance. The land was. I pressed the nib of the pen to the paper. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name, Harlan Jeremiah West. The ink was dark and permanent. I signed every page, initialed every clause. With every stroke of the pen, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't losing anything. I was shedding a burden. Mitch took the papers back. He stamped them with his notary seal. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper was like a hammer, striking a firing pin. Clack, clack, clack. It is done, Mitch said. He looked at his watch. It is 4 a.m. I will be at the recorder's office the second they open at 8. By the time Braden says I do, this document will be public record. I sat back in the chair, feeling a strange sense of peace. So I asked, what happens when Braden tries to transfer the deed on Monday? Mitch laughed, a genuine hearty laugh this time. When he tries to transfer the deed, the bank will run a title search. They will see the easement. They will see that the collateral for their loan is now worthless. They will pull the funding immediately. The mob. They will realize Braden promised them a gold mine and delivered a nature preserve. He won't just be broke, Harlan. He will be a liability. And the mental health hold, I asked. Mitch grinned. Let them try. What is the point of declaring you incompetent to manage your assets when you have already legally donated them to a charity? You have no assets left to seize. You are just a pensioner living on protected land. You have removed yourself from the game. I picked up my cold coffee and raised it in a toast. To the land, I said. To the land, Mitch replied, clinking his mug against mine. We sat there for a while longer, watching the sun begin to creep over the horizon. The sky was turning a pale purple, the color of a fresh bruise or a new beginning. I drove home as the world woke up. The ranch looked different to me that morning. The grass looked greener. The fences looked stronger. It wasn't just property anymore. It was a sanctuary. I had given it away to save it. I parked the truck and walked up the steps to my porch. I sat in the rocking chair listening to the birds sing. Braden Cole was waking up right now in his penthouse thinking he had won. He was putting on his expensive suit, checking his hair in the mirror, dreaming of his millions. He didn't know that he was already dead. He didn't know that the ground beneath his feet had already shifted. I closed my eyes and let myself nap for an hour. I needed the rest, because today was the wedding. Today I had to put on my tuxedo. I had to walk into that church and play the part of the defeated father one last time. But under my jacket, I wouldn't just be carrying a gun. I would be carrying the knowledge that I had already detonated the bomb. I just had to wait for him to step on the trigger. The legal war was over. I had won it with a pen. Now the physical war was about to begin, and for that I had my Colt 1911. I woke up when the sun hit my face. I stood up, stretched, and walked inside to shave. I looked at the mirror. The face staring back wasn't the tired old man from yesterday. It was the face of a soldier who had just secured the perimeter. I dressed slowly. The white shirt, the black tie, the cummerbund. I looked like a gentleman. I felt like an executioner. As I drove to the church, I saw the construction signs Braden had already put up on the edge of town. Future site of West Hills Resort. Coming soon. I rolled down my window and spat on the ground as I passed them. Not in this lifetime, son, I whispered to the wind. Not in this lifetime. The trap was set. The bait was taken. The land was safe. Now it was time to save the girl. The sun went down on the West Ranch for what felt like the last time. It wasn't a beautiful sunset. It was a bruise on the horizon, streaks of purple and angry red bleeding into the darkness of the mountains. I sat on the porch watching the light die, listening to the wind move through the wheatgrass. It is a sound I have loved for 70 years, a dry, whispering hiss that sounds like the earth breathing. But tonight, it sounded like a countdown. The phone inside the house rang. It was a shrill mechanical intrusion that shattered the peace. I didn't rush to answer it. I let it ring 4 times, taking a slow sip of my coffee before I pushed myself out of the rocking chair and walked into the kitchen. I knew who it was. There was only one person arrogant enough to call a man the night before he steals his life. I picked up the receiver. "Hello," I said, making my voice sound tired, beaten. "Don't forget the red folder, Harlan." Braden didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just barked the order like he was talking to an employee he was about to fire. "I have it right here, Braden," I said, staring at the empty kitchen table. "The original deed. The land survey." "It is all ready. Good," he said. "And listen to me, old man. I know you. I know you have got that stubborn streak, but do not try anything tomorrow. I have security at the church. I have people watching the roads. If you pull a stunt, if you try to make a scene, remember what we discussed. Remember the file from '98. Remember where your daughter sleeps." I gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. I wanted to tell him that his security meant nothing to me. I wanted to tell him that his threats were empty because a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. But I swallowed the rage. I forced it down into the pit of my stomach where it burned like acid. "I won't cause trouble," I lied. "I just want this over. I just want my daughter to be happy." "She will be ecstatic," Braden said, his voice dripping with condescension. "She will be the wife of the biggest developer in Montana. Just bring the papers and wear a nice suit. Try not to look like a beggar." The line went dead. I hung up the phone slowly. The house fell silent again, but the air felt charged, heavy with static. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtains shut. I didn't want the night looking in on me. I went to the pantry and reached up to the top shelf behind the boxes of oatmeal and canned beans. My hand found the cold metal of the lockbox. I pulled it down and set it on the table. Inside was my service pistol, the Colt 1911. It was the same gun I had carried in the jungle, the same gun that had saved my life more times than I could count, and yes, the same gun that had taken a life in this very hallway 20 years ago. I stripped the weapon. My hands moved with a muscle memory that age hadn't touched. I took apart the slide, the barrel, the recoil spring. I laid the pieces out on a clean rag. The smell of gun oil and solvent filled the kitchen, a sharp chemical scent that smelled like duty. I cleaned every inch of steel. I checked the firing pin. I oiled the slide rails. This wasn't just maintenance. It was a ritual. It was a prayer. I wasn't planning to start a shooting war in a church. The plan with the land trust was solid. The legal trap was set. But I knew men like Braden Cole, and I knew the men he worked for. When a predator realizes he has been trapped, he doesn't surrender. He lashes out. If the legal paperwork failed, if the police didn't arrive in time, if Braden tried to hurt Lily when he realized he had lost, I needed to be the final line of defense. And if that meant trading my life for hers, so be it. I reassembled the gun. The click of the slide locking into place was a comforting sound. I loaded the magazine. 7 rounds of hollow point ammunition. I racked the slide chambering around and engaged the safety. I tucked the gun into the waistband of my trousers at the small of my back, just to feel the weight of it. It felt like an anchor keeping me grounded. I sat back down at the table and pulled a piece of notepad paper toward me. I took a pen from my pocket. My hand hovered over the paper for a long time. How do you say goodbye to your child when you are not sure if you are going to see the sunset? Tomorrow I didn't want to write a suicide note. I wanted to write a victory speech. But a soldier prepares for every outcome. If things went wrong tomorrow, if Braden's security was trigger-happy, or if the mobsters decided to silence the problem, I needed Lily to know the truth. I needed her to know that I didn't die because I was crazy. I died because I loved her. My dearest Lily, I wrote. The pen scratched loudly in the quiet room. If you are reading this, then things didn't go according to plan. I want you to know that I am not angry with you. I never was. I know why you did what you did. You were trying to protect me from the ghosts of my past. But you didn't know that I made peace with those ghosts a long time ago. I paused, looking at the words. They looked blurry through my reading glasses. The ranch is safe, I continued. You will find out soon that I gave it away. I gave it to the land trust. I did it so that no one could ever use it to hurt you again. The land belongs to the wild now, just like your mother wanted. Do not mourn for the money. Money comes and goes. The land is eternal. I took a breath and wrote the final lines. Do not let Braden define you. Do not let his lies become your truth. You are a West. You are strong. You are kind. And you are the best thing I ever did with my life. Be free, pumpkin. Love, Dad. I folded the note and put it in an envelope. I wrote Lily on the front. I placed it on the center of the kitchen table, weighing it down with the salt shaker. If I didn't come home, the sheriff would find it. I stood up and walked into the living room. The house felt big tonight. Too big. I walked to the back door and stepped out onto the porch again. The moon had risen, painting the fields in silver and blue. I looked out at the south pasture. In the moonlight, the tall grass rippled like the ocean. And for a moment, the years peeled back. I saw her. I saw a 5-year-old Lily wearing her little denim overalls and pink rubber boots running through that grass. I could hear her laughter, clear as a bell ringing in the cold night air. I saw her chasing a butterfly, tripping over her own feet and tumbling into the dirt. I saw myself running to pick her up, dusting her off and kissing her forehead. "Daddy, look," she had said, holding up a handful of wildflowers. "For you." I closed my eyes, letting the memory wash over me. That little girl was still in there. She was trapped inside the terrified woman living in that glass penthouse, buried under layers of fear and manipulation. Braden had tried to kill that little girl. He had tried to crush her spirit with his greed and his cruelty. But he had failed. Because she was my daughter. And tomorrow I was going to break down the walls of her prison. I looked at the barn standing stoic in the dark. I looked at the tree line where I had taught her to hunt. This land was in my blood. Giving it away to the trust felt like cutting off a limb, but I knew it was the only way to stop the infection. I am ready, Sarah, I whispered to the wind. I kept my promise. I kept it wild. Now help me keep her safe. I went back inside and turned off the lights. I didn't go to bed. I sat in the armchair by the window, the gun on the table next to me, the envelope waiting in the kitchen. I watched the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked rhythmically. Tick, tick, tick. Every second brought me closer to the wedding. Every second brought me closer to the moment I would look Braden Cole in the eye and watch his world crumble. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of failing. But as the first gray light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky, a strange calm settled over me. I had the recordings. I had the trust documents. I had the gun. And I had the truth. I stood up and walked to the bathroom. I shaved my face clean, revealing the sharp jawline that had grayed but not softened. I put on my tuxedo. It was a little tight in the shoulders, but it fit. I tied my tie. I looked at myself in the mirror. Harlan West, I said to my reflection. One last mission. I picked up the gun and tucked it into my waistband. I picked up the red folder Braden had demanded, the one that now contained useless pieces of paper. I walked out the door, locking it behind me. The sun was up now. It was going to be a beautiful day for a wedding. Or a funeral. I got into my truck and turned the key. The engine roared to life. I didn't look back at the house. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. The road to the church. The road to war. The silence in the interrogation room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. I sat there staring at my reflection in the two-way mirror, the memory of that drive to the church fading back into the reality of the handcuffs biting into my wrists. I had told Mitch everything. I had laid out the history, the threats, the recordings, and the desperate plan I had hatched to save my daughter. Now I was just an old man in a tuxedo, waiting for the law to decide if I was a hero or a felon. The door buzzed again. This time when it swung open, the energy in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't the heavy atmosphere of judgment anymore. It was the electric charge of action. Mitch walked in first. The exhaustion was gone from his face, replaced by a look I hadn't seen since we won the state championship in '68. It was a grin of pure, unadulterated victory. Behind him walked Sheriff Miller. The sheriff didn't look angry. He looked apologetic. And behind him was a man I didn't recognize, a man in a sharp gray suit with eyes that looked like they had seen things worse than I saw in the jungle. "Unlock him," Jim Mitch said, tossing his briefcase onto the table. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, pulling the keys from his belt. "I am sorry about the rough treatment," Harlan Miller said quietly, as the cuffs clicked open. "We had to follow protocol given the firearm. But things have changed. Drastically." I rubbed my wrists, feeling the blood flow back into my fingers. I looked at Mitch. "What is going on?" I asked. "Did you play the tape?" Mitch laughed, shaking his head. "We played the tape, Harlan. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was what Lily gave you." I looked at him confused for a split second. Then I remembered. The sensation of the paper note in my hand at the altar. But there had been something else, hadn't there? In the chaos. In the adrenaline of drawing my gun, I had almost forgotten the small hard lump I had felt inside the folded paper. When the officers patted me down, they had taken everything. The man in the gray suit stepped forward. He placed a small plastic evidence bag on the table. Inside was a micro USB drive no bigger than a fingernail. "I am Agent Sterling with the FBI," the man said. His voice was dry and professional. "Your daughter is a very brave young woman, Mr. West, and a very smart one." I stared at the tiny drive. "What is on that?" I asked. "Everything," Sterling said. "Apparently, while Braden was busy planning his takeover of your ranch, Lily was busy accessing his laptop. She didn't just find emails, she found the ledger." Mitch leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Harlan Braden isn't just a real estate scammer. He is a washing machine. The investors he told you about, the ones putting up the capital for the resort. They are not developers. They are a front for the Sinaloa cartel." The room seemed to tilt. Cartel. I thought I was fighting a greedy yuppie and some local mobsters. I didn't know I was standing in the path of international drug traffickers. "They needed the resort to clean their cash," Sterling explained. "A casino is the perfect laundry. Millions of dollars flowing in and out, easy to hide the dirty money in the mix. Braden Cole was in debt to them for $15 million. Delivering your ranch was his way of paying off that debt. If he failed, he was a dead man, and Lily knew. I asked, my heart aching for her. She suspected," Mitch said. "She found the accounts. She downloaded the transfer logs. That drive proves Braden is guilty of money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. And combined with your wiretap recording of him planning to commit you to an asylum. We have him, Harlan. We have him dead to rights." I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in my tuxedo jacket. "So where is he?" I asked. "Is he in a cell down the hall?" Sterling shook his head. "No. He is still at the reception venue, the grand ballroom at the hotel." I frowned. Why, the wedding was ruined. "Because he has to be there," Sterling said grimly. "His investors are there. Mr. Ricci and his associates flew in this morning. Braden is terrified. He is trying to salvage the deal. He is telling them that the scene at the church was just a temporary setback, that you are being arrested, and that he will have the power of attorney by Monday. He is trying to keep them from killing him right there in the ballroom. So go get him," I said. "You have the evidence." "We will," Sterling said. "But we have a unique opportunity here. Ricci is a ghost. We have been chasing him for 3 years. He is in that ballroom right now waiting for Braden to deliver the deed to your ranch. If we raid the place now, Ricci slips out the back. We need them together. We need the transaction to be attempted." Sterling looked at me, his eyes assessing me like a commanding officer inspecting a soldier. "We need you, Mr. West." "Me?" I asked. "Technically, you are still the owner of the property," Sterling said. "We know about the land trust, but Braden doesn't know you signed it yet. As far as he knows, you are currently in custody, scared and broken." Mitch stepped in. "They want you to walk into that reception, Harlan." I looked at Mitch, then at the sheriff. They were asking me to walk into a room full of cartel enforcers and a desperate man who wanted me dead. "You want me to be the bait," I said. "I want you to be the delivery man," Sterling corrected. "We want you to walk in there and toss that red folder on the table. We want Braden to think he has won. We want him to hand it to Ricci. The moment Ricci touches that folder, we have him for conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. That is the signal." And then I asked. And then Sterling smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. "We bring the house down." I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I thought about Lily. She was safe now in protective custody, according to Mitch. But she wouldn't be truly safe as long as Braden and Ricci were walking the earth. "I don't have my gun," I said. Sheriff Miller reached behind him and pulled my Colt 1911 from the evidence locker. He placed it on the table. "It is fully loaded," Miller said. "But the firing pin is removed again. You are going in as a civilian, Harlan. We will have agents dressed as waiters, guests, and band members. You won't need to shoot. You just need to stand tall." I picked up the gun. It felt heavy, familiar. I tucked it into my waistband. "I don't need a firing pin to scare a coward like Braden Cole," I said. I looked at Mitch. "Does Braden know I am coming?" "No," Mitch said. "He thinks you are rotting in this cell. He thinks he is spinning a story to Richie about how he will visit you in the asylum on Monday. When you walk through those doors, it is going to be the shock of his life. I buttoned my jacket. I adjusted my tie. The tiredness was gone. The old man who sat on the porch and watched the sunset was gone. In his place was the Marine who had crawled through the mud in '68. "Let's go to a party," I said. We walked out of the police station into the bright afternoon sun. An unmarked black SUV was waiting. I climbed into the back seat next to Agent Sterling. As we drove toward the hotel, I watched the town pass by. The same town where I had raised my family. The same town Braden had tried to turn against me. He had underestimated everything. He underestimated the land. He underestimated my daughter. And most of all, he underestimated what an old man will do when you back him into a corner. I touched the breast pocket of my jacket. The red folder was there. The folder that contained the paperwork for the land trust. The paperwork that made my ranch worthless to them. I wasn't just bringing bait. I was bringing a bomb. And I couldn't wait to see the look on Braden's face when it went off. The SUV turned into the hotel driveway. I could see the valet parking line filled with luxury cars. The cartel had come in style. "Ready?" Sterling asked, checking his earpiece. I opened the door and stepped out. "I was born ready," I said. I walked up the steps to the grand ballroom. The music was playing inside. People were laughing. They were celebrating a wedding that hadn't happened, celebrating a theft that would never be completed. I pushed open the double doors. The light from the chandeliers hit my face. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the carpet. It was showtime. The double doors of the grand ballroom were heavy, solid oak handles, cool to the touch. I could hear the muffled sound of a jazz band playing inside a cheerful tune that felt completely wrong. The execution I was about to perform. I pushed the doors open. The light from a dozen crystal chandeliers hit my eyes, momentarily blinding me. The room was a sea of expensive tuxedos and designer gowns, a gathering of the city elite who had come to witness a union of power and money. But as I stepped onto the plush carpet, the music faltered. The conductor saw me first, his baton freezing in midair. Then the guests near the door turned. A ripple of silence spread through the room like a wave, extinguishing the laughter and the chatter, until the only sound left was the clinking of silverware on china. I stood there in my tuxedo, the one I had bought 30 years ago. It was a little tight in the shoulders, and the style was outdated, but I wore it like armor. I scanned the room. I saw Lily first. She was sitting at the head table looking like a statue made of ice. Her face was pale, her eyes fixed on her lap. She looked like she was waiting for a blow that she knew was coming. Next to her sat Braden Cole. He was holding a glass of champagne, laughing too loudly at something a man in a dark suit had just said. When the silence reached the head table, Braden looked up. His smile vanished. For a second, he looked like he had seen a ghost. His eyes darted to the side doors, looking for the security guards who were supposed to keep the riffraff out. But there were no guards. The FBI had quietly removed them 10 minutes ago. Harlan Braden said, his voice cracking. He stood up, knocking over his chair. It clattered loudly on the parquet floor. He marched toward me, his face flushing with a mixture of fear and rage. He thought I had escaped. He thought I was a fugitive. He saw an opportunity to play the victim one last time. "What are you doing here?" he hissed as he got close, lowering his voice so the guests wouldn't hear the venom. "You are supposed to be in a cell. Did you break out? You just made my case for me, old man. Now I can add fugitive to the list of reasons why you are unfit." He reached out to grab my arm, trying to steer me away from the crowd. "Security!" he shouted. "Get this man out of here!" No one moved. The waiters, who were actually federal agents, continued to pour water. The guests just stared. I didn't move an inch. I looked at Braden, really looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the tremor in his hands. He was terrified. Not of me, but of the man sitting at the table behind him. Mr. Ricci, the man with the cold eyes and the silent demeanor. I am not going anywhere, Braden, I said. My voice was calm, carrying across the silent room. You asked for the deed. You told me to bring the red folder. Well, here it is. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folder. It was bright red, the color of a warning sign. I didn't hand it to him. I tossed it onto the nearest round table. It slid across the white tablecloth, knocking over a crystal vase of white roses. The water spilled, soaking the paper. Braden stared at the folder. He looked back at me, confused. What is this? He asked. It is what you wanted, I said. The future of the West Ranch. Go ahead, open it, show your friends. Braden snatched the folder up. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely open the cover. He scanned the first page, then the second. I watched the blood drain from his face. It went from red to a sickly shade of gray. He started to read faster, his eyes widening with every line. What is this? He whispered. Conservation. Easement. Nonprofit trust. He looked up at me, his eyes wild. You can't do this. You can't give it away. I didn't give it away, I said, stepping closer. I just gave away the part you wanted. I donated the development rights to the Montana Land Trust. As of 8 o'clock this morning, that land is protected in perpetuity. That means forever, Braden. No casinos, no hotels, no parking lots. You can't even build a tool shed on it without a federal permit. I pointed at the folder. You wanted the land. You got it. But the value of that land just dropped from $40 million to zero. It is just dirt now, son. Just dirt and grass. Braden made a sound like a wounded animal. He crumpled the paper in his fist. You crazy old fool, he screamed, losing all composure. You ruined everything. Do you know what you have done? I know exactly what I have done, I said. I saved my home. And I saved my daughter. Suddenly a chair scraped back at the head table. Mr. Ricci stood up. He wasn't tall, but he had a presence that made the air temperature drop 10 degrees. He walked over to Braden, his movements slow and deliberate. Let me see that, Ricci said softly. Braden tried to hide the folder behind his back, terror flooding his eyes. It is a mistake, Mr. Ricci, he stammered. The old man is senile. This isn't legal. I can fix it. I just need a few days. Ricci didn't ask again. He reached out and took the folder from Braden's grip with effortless strength. He read the document. He read the signature. He read the notary stamp from Mitch O'Connell. Ricci looked at Braden. Then he looked at me. A small, cold smile touched his lips. He played you, kid, Ricci said. He played you like a fiddle. You sold us a gold mine, and you delivered a nature park. Please, Braden begged, backing away. I didn't know. He tricked me, Ricci reached into his jacket. He didn't pull out a folder. He pulled out a knife. It was a sleek silver blade that caught the light of the chandeliers. The guests screamed. The band dropped their instruments. You owe me $15 million, Braden Ricci said, his voice devoid of emotion. And I don't take payment in grass. Braden scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet. He fell to the floor, crawling crab-like away from the advancing mobster. That was the signal. From the kitchen doors, from the main entrance, from behind the bar, voices erupted. Federal agents, drop the weapon, FBI. The waiters pulled handguns from their serving trays. The guests dove under the tables. The ballroom turned into a chaotic swirl of motion. Ricci didn't drop the knife. He wasn't the kind of man who surrendered. He lunged at Braden, desperate to take his payment in blood before the law took him. Braden screamed a high-pitched sound that shamed everyone who heard it. He scrambled behind a table, using a terrified bridesmaid as a human shield. I didn't watch the arrest. I didn't care about Ricci or Braden. I had only one objective. Lily. She was still sitting at the head table, frozen in shock. The chaos was swirling around her, agents shouting, glass breaking, but she hadn't moved. She was in the eye of the storm. I moved. I moved faster than I had in 20 years. I vaulted over a fallen chair. I shoved past a screaming guest. I reached the head table just as one of Ricci's bodyguards pulled a gun looking for a target. I didn't have time to think. I tackled Lily, wrapping my arms around her and pulling her down to the floor behind the thick oak table. "Stay down," I shouted over the noise. 2 gunshots rang out. Wood splinters rained down on us. I covered her head with my body, pressing her face into my chest. I could feel her shaking, vibrating with terror. "Daddy," she whimpered. "I am here, Pumpkin," I whispered, stroking her hair. "I have got you. I have got you." The gunfire stopped as quickly as it had started. The shouts turned to commands. "Suspect down. Secure the room." I looked up cautiously. Braden was on the floor, handcuffed, weeping into the carpet. Ricci was pressed against the wall by 3 agents. The dream of the West Hills resort was over. It had ended not with a ribbon cutting, but with the snap of handcuffs. I looked down at Lily. She looked up at me, her mascara running, her beautiful dress ruined. But she was alive. She was safe. "It is over, Lily," I said, helping her sit up. "The bad guys lost." She looked at Braden, then at the red folder lying in a puddle of water and champagne. She looked at me and her eyes filled with tears. But they weren't tears of fear this time. They were tears of relief. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." "We did it," I corrected her. I helped her stand up. The room was a disaster zone, but to me, it looked like victory. I took off my tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "Let's go home, Lily," I said. "The cows need feeding, and I think we both could use a strong cup of coffee." She nodded, leaning into my side. We walked out of the ballroom, past the FBI agents, past the ruined wedding cake, and past the man who had tried to destroy us. I didn't look back at Braden. He was yesterday's news. I walked out into the cool afternoon air, my arm around my daughter, leaving the wreckage of greed behind us. The land was safe. The family was safe. And for the first time in a long time, the future looked clear. The sun came up over the West Ranch just like it had for 100 years. It did not care that a wedding had been ruined or that a criminal empire had collapsed in a hotel ballroom. It just rose steady and golden, lighting up the frost on the fence posts and turning the creek into a ribbon of silver. I stood at the kitchen window watching the light hit the barn. For the first time in months, the sight did not bring a knot of anxiety to my stomach. There were no drones buzzing in the sky. There were no black SUVs parked on the ridge. There was just the land breathing quietly in the morning chill. The radio on the counter was playing the local news, but the volume was low. I did not need to hear the details to know what was happening. I had heard enough from Agent Sterling before we left the hotel. Braden Cole was currently sitting in a federal holding cell, and this time there would be no bail. The charges were a laundry list of felonies that would keep him behind bars for the rest of his natural life. Racketeering, wire fraud, money laundering, and thanks to the testimony of Mr. Ricci, who was cutting a deal to save his own skin, conspiracy to commit murder. Braden would never see a sunrise over my mountains again. And he wasn't alone. Veronica, his mother, had been arrested late last night at her condo. It turned out she wasn't just a snobbish bystander. She had been the one moving the money through shell accounts, funding her fur coats and facials with cartel cash. The Cole dynasty had crumbled into dust in less than 24 hours. I poured 2 cups of coffee. I took them out to the front porch. Lily was sitting on the swing, wrapped in an old patchwork quilt that her mother had made. She was staring out at the south pasture, her eyes swollen, her face scrubbed clean of the makeup she had worn yesterday. She looked young again, vulnerable, but she wasn't shaking anymore. I sat down in the rocking chair next to her and held out the mug. "Drink this," I said softly. It is black just how you used to take it before you started drinking those fancy lattes. Lily took the mug with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. She didn't drink. She just looked down into the dark liquid. "I ruined it, Dad," she whispered. Her voice was brittle like dry leaves. I took a sip of my own coffee, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "What did you ruin, Pumpkin?" I asked. "The ranch," she said, tears spilling over her lashes again. "I know what you did with the land trust. Mitch told me on the ride home. You signed away the development rights. You made the land worthless just to stop Braden. If I hadn't been so weak, if I hadn't let him manipulate me, you wouldn't have had to do that. You could have sold it one day. You could have been rich. Now it is just dirt." I set my mug down on the railing. The wood was cold and rough under my hand. "Look at me, Lily." She turned her head slowly, her eyes full of guilt and shame. "Do you see that ridge over there?" I asked, pointing to the east. "Do you see where the hawks are circling?" She nodded. "Your grandfather bought that ridge with money he saved from working in a coal mine. He didn't buy it because he wanted to get rich. He bought it because he wanted a place where no one could tell him what to do. He bought it for freedom." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "You think I lost $40 million yesterday. But I didn't lose anything. That money was never real, Lily. It was a mirage. It was the bait in a trap. Braden and his friends saw dollar signs when they looked at this valley. But you know what I see?" I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. "I see the place where you took your first steps. I see the place where your mother and I sat on this very porch and dreamed about your future. I see a sanctuary. When I signed those papers, I didn't destroy the ranch. I saved it. I made sure that no matter what happens to me or to you, no one can ever pour concrete over our memories." "But I put you in danger," Lily sobbed. "I forged your signature. I lied to you. I was so scared, Dad. I was so scared he would send you to prison." I moved from the rocker to the swing, sitting beside her. I wrapped my heavy arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. She buried her face in my flannel shirt and cried, letting go of the terror she had been carrying for months. "You didn't put me in danger," I said firmly, stroking her hair. "You saved me. Do you have any idea how much courage it took to hand me that note? Standing there at the altar with him right next to you, with his threats ringing in your ears. Most people would have frozen. Most people would have said, 'I do just to survive.'" I lifted her chin so she had to look at me. "You fought back, Lily. You were terrified, but you fought back. That is what a West does. We don't break. We might bend, we might bleed, but we do not break." I wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "We lost the paper value of the land, yes. We lost the chance to be millionaires. But look at what we kept. We kept the house, we kept the land wild, we kept our dignity, and most importantly, we kept each other." Lily sniffled, a small, watery smile touching her lips. "He is really gone?" she asked. "He can't come back?" "He is gone," I promised. "The wolves have been chased off, and the sheep are safe. That is the job, Lily. That has always been the job." We sat there for a long time as the sun climbed higher, warming the wooden planks of the porch. The birds started to sing a chaotic, joyful chorus that drowned out the dark memories of yesterday. I looked at my daughter. She was bruised, she was tired, and she had a long road of healing ahead of her. But she was free. The shadow that had been hanging over her was gone. I picked up my coffee again. It had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I took a long drink, tasting the bitterness, tasting the morning. I looked out at the fields one last time. The wind rippled through the grass, looking like waves on a green ocean. It was beautiful. It was ours. And it would stay that way forever. "I am going to need help fixing that west fence," I said casually. The bulls have been pushing against it. Lily laughed, a genuine sound this time. I will get my gloves, she said. That is my girl, I said. I watched her walk back into the house, her head held a little higher. I stayed on the porch for a minute longer. I touched the pocket where I used to carry the gun. It was empty now. I didn't need it. The war was over. The peace had begun. And as I sat there, an old man with a cold cup of coffee and a worthless piece of land, I knew I was the richest man in the world. This story is a reminder to all of us that the true value of our lives is not measured in the assets we hold, but in the people we protect. We often get blinded by the promise of wealth or the fear of loss, forgetting that our integrity and our family are the only things that truly belong to us. Harlan taught us that sometimes you have to be willing to burn down the things that weigh you down in order to save the things that lift you up. Never let fear make your decisions for you. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me share more stories like this with you. And I want to know, have you ever had to make a hard sacrifice to protect your family? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Stay safe, stay strong, and remember the wolf only wins if the shepherd is asleep. See you in the next story.